and welcome to another episode of Surrendered Birth Stories. Birth stories, birth education, and the pursuit of surrendering it all to God. Let's get started. Well, good morning, or good afternoon, or good night, whenever you're listening to this. I am so honored to have today's guest on. Her name is Kim, and she shares her heart today. She has an extremely unique, emotional, uplifting, moving story that I pray just really lifts your faith in the Lord and our Maker. I do want to give the heads up that miscarriage is a large part of today's story. So if that is not something that you're in a place to listen to right now, maybe just save this episode for a later time when you feel like you could handle it. That being said, it is an extremely encouraging story and one that has increased my faith in our miracle working God tremendously. And it might be a good story to listen to if you have recently been through a miscarriage or have experienced miscarriage in the past. I find that women who have heard her story are often encouraged after they hear it. So I can't wait for you to listen, so let's get started. Well, welcome to the Surrendered Birth Stories podcast. Today I have a very special guest with me. Her name is Kim. And Kim, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. My name is Kimberly Shobe. We live in Colfax. I am the mom to 3. They are all older now. I have a young adult. I have a senior in high school getting ready to be, and one getting ready to start high school. So I'm glad that we're finally out of the middle school stage. That's wonderful. I work. I take care of my family. My husband works. That's just kind of what we do.
Awesome. Well, you have a very special story to share with us today. This is not necessarily our typical birth story that we share, which is I'm excited to change it up a little bit. And I actually had the privilege of reading this story and then was so inspired that I asked Kim to come share, and she was willing. So I'm just going to let you take it from here.
Well, I am excited. I don't think I've ever sat down and just shared this story with someone, probably in many, many years. So my husband shares this story on Facebook every year. It's just very special, very important to us. But to sit down and explain it, I'm going to try not to cry.
I have tissues.
But when I left the house, that's what my daughter said. She said, "Don't cry too much." It's not a typical story, but it is a story of hope. And
Yes.
I'm happy to be able to share it. So just a little background. So my husband and I were married in 99. We had our first child in 2002. Everything about that pregnancy was quote unquote perfect. Every time we went to the doctor, everything was perfect, no issues, anything like that. In fact, I convinced myself that I would go beyond my due date because you're like, oh, first pregnancies, you're going to go beyond. My due date was November 9th. My water broke November 8th. And we go to the hospital. And other than having to have an emergency C-section after many hours of labor, everything about that pregnancy was fine. Recovery, C-section, I'm like, that's easy peasy. That was great. So everything was great. So when we became pregnant again in 2004, we were very excited. Everything had gone so well with the other pregnancy. Our daughter was at that time almost 2. So very excited. I'm about 13 weeks, 14 weeks, and I go for my second appointment. We'd already heard the heartbeat at, 8 weeks or whatever. So we're going for the second appointment. My husband can't go with me because of work. So I have my daughter with me. Easy, right? I'm going to go in. It's a typical appointment. No reason to think anything was wrong. Go in, the midwife starts her exam, goes to listen for the heartbeat, and there's an issue. When she sends me to ultrasound, I know something is not right. And the ultrasound tech doesn't really want to say anything to me, but I know it's something is wrong. I go back to the midwife's office. I'm sitting on the couch and I see this picture is just burned in my brain. My daughter, she's almost 2, has a blanket we had brought spread out on the floor, and she's eating a little picnic of goldfish and marshmallows, and just so peaceful. And the midwife tells me that there is no heartbeat and we've lost the baby, that we lost the baby at about 12 weeks. And I thought I was about 14 weeks along. So they call my husband and he comes and, going through the whole grieving process of that. And my daughter was so young, she didn't really know anything. So I was like, well, at least I'm relieved of that. I don't have to explain to her that now we're not going to have a baby. I hold it all together, cry only in the shower because I'm a mom. You have to take care of your child and you just move on. So when we became pregnant again in 2005, we were cautiously excited, knowing that we had lost a child, and moving forward, how are you supposed to be excited knowing that that can happen, having experienced that before? So 2005, we become pregnant around the same time of year that we were pregnant. So it's a lot of similarities to that, which is just kind of ironic, but also brings back a lot of memories. And I worried constantly. Like, I just really worried. And I was having a really hard time enjoying my pregnancy, just enjoying the thought of how do I plan for the future? Because I planned for the future before and it didn't happen. So how do I plan and how do I trust and how do I believe God for all these things? And in my mind, it was how do I believe God that everything's going to be okay? Not how do I believe God that regardless of what happens, everything's going to be okay. So I'm sitting in church one day and we're in worship and I'm probably around, we've heard the heartbeat, so 8, 9, maybe 10 weeks along. And we're in worship and I just sit down and I put my head down and I remember the green carpet. I'm staring down at the green carpet and I'm just praying. I'm like, God, I don't understand how I'm supposed to be happy and how I'm supposed to trust you. Make that happen. I don't know. What am I supposed to do for that? And God spoke to me. And when I say he spoke to me, it was not a voice that I heard. It was an impression on my spirit, but it was clear as day. And he said, now, mind you, we're like 8, 9 weeks, 10 at the most. Don't know what we're having. We just know that we're pregnant. God spoke to me and he said, you are going to have a son. And his name is going to be Corbin Dallas. He needs a great name because he's going to do great things for me. And I stopped dead in my tracks. And I just was like, did I just hear that? Like, is that real or did I make that up? Like, did God just say that to me? And I sat there for a second and it was the most amazing peace that came over. And I was just like, well, okay. Well, all right. That's it. Okay. Stood up and started worshiping. I'm like, okay, that's it. And I went home and I always think about Mary and how the Bible says that she pondered these things in her heart. And I just always have had this picture of her just kind of like all these memories and thoughts that she just kind of holds dear and she just thinks about them because they comfort her. And it's kind of like her little secret, her little thing, And so that's kind of what I was doing. Like I was pondering that moment in my heart. And I remember being upstairs and being on the landing and my husband coming by. And I was very cryptic, like women often are. And he walked by and I was like, do you ever wonder what I think about when we're at church? And he just kind of looks at me. He's like, well, I figured if it's something you want me to know, you'd tell me. And I'm like, okay, that's that. So I just kind of like put that aside and just kind of pushed it to the back and just still wondering, am I crazy or did I really hear God? And I would try to worry and I couldn't. I felt that peace. And I would think, but what about this? And that peace would come back. And I'm like, okay, there's got to be something to this. And then I just kind of forgot about that. And a couple of weeks later, we went on this, my work, I planned this retreat. There was only about 5 of us. We went and we brought our spouses. And we had gone out to dinner one night. And we stopped by the grocery store on the way home, and my husband and the gentleman that I worked with went inside to get like snacks and stuff. And I remember I had on a white maternity shirt. Why do I remember that? I don't know. I guess it was one I really liked. But I remember like I felt really good. You know, 'cause sometimes when you're pregnant, you don't feel really good. But I started showing. I'm like, okay, I'm feeling good about this. I have this confidence. Not really thinking that that confidence and peace was coming from what God gave me and what he told me, but it was there. Looking back on it, I'm like, that's why I felt that way. But they get back in the car and my husband goes, I got you a surprise. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm pregnant. He probably bought me some ice cream or, you know, something like that. He's like, I got you a baby name book. At this random grocery store in this mountain town, they have a baby name book. I'm like, okay. So we go back to the hotel and we're sitting there and I'm flipping through the book and I'm flipping through the girls' names and kind of looking and I get to the boys' names and all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, I have something to tell you. And he's like, what? I'm like, do you remember the other week when I asked you if you ever thought about what I thought about, like during church? And he was like, no, but okay, what? And I said, well, I could be crazy, but I need to tell you what I feel like God told me. And I said, I feel like during that time in worship, God told me I was worrying so much that he said, you are going to have a son. His name is going to be Corbin Dallas. He needs a great name because he's going to do great things for me. And my husband, in his infinite wisdom and discernment and just leading of the Lord, he just looks at me and I said, do you think I'm crazy? And he just took the book and he closed the book and he said, well, I guess when we find out if it's a boy, we'll know if you heard from God or not. There's no need to look at this book now. Because I've learned that when God speaks, there will be a confirmation. And if it's not him, then there's going to be confusion because God is not the author of confusion, but he will confirm what he said. And so I was like, well, the confirmation will be if it is a boy, that was God. And if not, then I'm hearing voices and we have a whole other story that we can tell. So we go about, and I don't even know what happened to that baby name book. Like, I don't ever remember picking it up again. And we go home from this retreat, and it's probably just a week or two later. I was about 13 weeks. It was about the same time that we lost our child the year previous. And David was, he worked at a group home at that time, and he had pulled a double shift. And so he didn't get home till like 11:30 at night. And I had waited up for him. Our daughter was in bed, and I'm sitting in our bed. He had come in and gone in and changed clothes and was, had gone to the bathroom and was getting ready for bed. And I am sitting in the bed reading, and all of a sudden I feel wet. And I'm like, this is way too early for me to lose control of my bladder. What is going on? And I'm like, daggone it. I get up, and it is blood. And there is blood everywhere. And when I say blood everywhere, it was bright red. There is something wrong. This is not normal. It was not spotting. There was blood everywhere. And so I run into the bathroom, and I start beating on the door and telling my husband that there's blood everywhere. There is blood everywhere. And I don't know what he expected to see when he came out, but I know he didn't expect to see that. I can overreact sometimes. That was not an overreaction. And he walked into, when he comes out of the bathroom, of course, I'm standing there. But when he goes into the bedroom and there's blood all over the bed, it's just like, okay, what do we need to do? I said, okay, I'm going to have to go to the hospital. I know that. We need to call the midwife, and I'm going to have to go to the hospital. So I call the midwife, tell her what's going on, and she's like, yep, get in the car now and meet me at the hospital. So we have our daughter, and we're going to have to do something with our daughter. It's, 12 o'clock at night. So I call some friends of ours that we had gone to church with, and I worked with her, and I was like, can you meet us at Women's Hospital and take Sarah, and we'll pick her up when we're done. I've got to go. It's an emergency. And they're like, yes, we'll be there. So while David is going to get Sarah up, I go into the bathroom to try to clean up just a little bit. And I sit down on the toilet, and all of a sudden this fleshy mass comes out. And I look at it, And I know that that is my baby. It wasn't like a clot, it was a fleshy mass. And so I get some tissue and I get it up. And my husband walks into the bathroom and I look at him and I hold it out and I just said, okay, this is our baby. And they're going to want to see this to determine what went wrong. So he looks, and where he found a Ziploc bag in the bathroom, I don't know, but he just stuck it in the Ziploc bag and he took the bag. And I clean up and we get Sarah, we get her in the car, and we start going. And it's about where we live, it's probably about 20-25 minutes to the hospital. And we start going, and I remember the exact place on the road, and I look back at her and I see her in her car seat, and she has this thing when she rides and she just kind of bounces her head. She's always done that. She's just looking out the window thinking that we're on an adventure, you know?
Right.
And I look at my husband and I just say, what are we going to tell Sarah? Like, she's old enough now to know. Like, what are we going to tell Sarah? And he pauses and he just looks at me and he says, I'm not going to decide anything until it's been decided. You see, at that moment, I had already decided that it was over. That was it. But my husband had the faith that we serve a God who is bigger than that. And he was praying for a miracle. He was praying for a resurrection. He was praying that God's hand would be on the situation. And I had to borrow from that faith because I did not have that faith at that moment. I had already decided that it was done. I was looking at what had happened the year previously and not looking, we had a healthy baby girl. You know, God is a God of infinite miracles. He does not run out. And why can't we ask those things? My husband believed that, and I'm so glad that he did. And I think that's why I'm sitting here today, was because of the faith of my husband. So we get to the hospital, and David drops me off to go check in, and he gets our daughter taken care of with our friends. And by the time he parks the car and comes in, I'm sitting down waiting, and we're sitting there, and I'd had absolutely no pain whatsoever. No cramps, nothing, just massive amounts of blood. And it's taking forever for them to come. And so I decide I'm going to go to the bathroom because there's still some blood, and I'm going to go to the bathroom before I get back in the back. And I walk down the hall and I go to the bathroom and I come back. And as I'm going to sit down, I had like the worst cramp ever, and I had not had any pain at all. And so I knew at that moment that was my body trying to get rid of everything. And I sat down, I was like, oh my gosh. And my husband's like, what is it? I'm like, I just have had the worst pain. I'm like, I haven't felt anything until now. I said, and that really, really hurt. I said, but it's gone now. And so about that time, they call us to come back, and we go back, and David tells this part of the story because it's just kind of all of a blur to me, but he says that when he walks in, he's had that baggie with that fleshy mass in it in the inside pocket of his jacket. And because he didn't want anyone to have to see it. And when we walk into the examination room, the nurse that gets us settled, he takes it out and hands it to her, and she just tosses it in the trash. And he's thinking, what in the heck are you doing? Like, that's my baby. Why are you throwing that baby away? And the midwife comes in, and this was my favorite midwife. In the practice that we were in, you rotate through the midwives. So, you never know who's going to be on call. And so God had my favorite midwife there, who had been there when my first baby was delivered and had been there, through the second one. And she walks in, and she's so kind. And she's like, let's take a look. Let's see what's going on. And she, does an exam on my belly, just feels around, and she pulls out whatever it's called to find the heartbeat. And she puts it on my belly. And right away, we hear a heartbeat. And she looks at me and she said, "You didn't expect to hear that, did you?" She said, "I didn't expect to hear that." And I just kept saying, "You're going to have a son. His name is going to be Corbin Dallas. He needs a great name because he's going to do great things for me." And so she does her physical exam. She was like, "Nothing looks like out of place. Like everything is still, your cervix, everything is fine. So we're going to send you down to ultrasound and they're going to look to see, is there a bleed somewhere? Is there something we can't see? Like, where is this coming from?" And at that time I had stopped bleeding. It was done. So we go down to ultrasound and David and I are just ecstatic. Like, we heard our baby's heartbeat. We're good. We're good. We had not had an ultrasound yet. Because we were, still early. And so this was the first time that we got to see our baby. Well, actually second. But the ultrasound tech is like going around and everything looks fine. All the parts that are supposed to be there are there. And she can't find where there has been any hemorrhage, any bleeding, any trauma, anything. Everything looks totally, perfectly normal. And we're just praising God, and we're just so happy and so ecstatic. And I will never forget it because she's finishing up and all of a sudden the baby flips over and throws the hand up like the baby's waving at us.
Hmm.
And I look at my husband and we look at the tech and we're all just like, "Did you just see that? Like, that baby is waving at us." We asked her if she could tell if it was a boy or girl. She said no. So we're like, okay, well, we just have to wait a little bit longer. It's fine. That fleshy mass that David had put in his pocket at the time, and I didn't know this until several weeks later when we were talking about everything, he had put it in his pocket next to his heart. And at the same moment that I told David that I had that pain, he felt a flutter in that pocket. He describes it like this is old time, I'm dating myself, like a pager, a little or your phone vibrates or something like that. He said that's what it felt like. And when we left I was getting dressed and everything after the ultrasound, we were getting ready to go back. David looked in that trash can and that fleshy mass was gone. It wasn't there anymore. It was gone. The bag was there, but the fleshy mass was not there. So we believe that that was Corbin that God put back because of the faith, because God has a plan for him. So we go home. Well, we go pick our daughter up. And I didn't realize until like the week after or so that our friends had no idea what was going on because everything was so hurried and they didn't ask questions. They were just like, yes, and they took our daughter. So like a week or two later, I explained to them what had happened. They said, we didn't know what had happened. We just knew that you needed something. And so just thankful for friends like that. So we go home. Then when we have our ultrasound, we find out that we're going to have a boy. And as soon as they tell us that it's a boy, we just look at each other and we're like, his name is Corbin Dallas. He needs a great name because he's going to do great things for God. And the rest of the pregnancy was, well, I would say pretty uneventful, but I had to do the glucose thing and drink all that stuff. And so they thought I was like pre-diabetic and he was lazy and wouldn't move and just all of this stuff. So it wasn't as perfect as the first one, but that was okay because I had my baby boy. And so we had the confirmation from God that was God. God spoke to me and told me that I was going to have a son and his name was going to be Corbin Dallas. Didn't have to look through a baby name book. God had spoken to that. And Corbin is now 17. He is an excellent student. He is an excellent athlete. He is an excellent person. He is a teenager. He is not this perfect person that you would say, oh, God just kind of moved them along. He's had his trials, but God is building him. God is moving him through his journey. And Corbin has felt like this has been, since he's heard the story over and over again, it's been a burden to him at times where he feels like he has to live up to something, that how is he ever going to do great things? And so he tries to push that aside. And it's just been a heavy mantle for him. And this year, as I read Corbin's story again, like I said, my husband posts it every year. As I read it again, God spoke to me and he was like, I don't need Corbin to do anything. It's not on him to do great things for me. I'm doing it through this story. And you need to tell Corbin that. It's not that he has to go out and preach a message or feed, hungry people or do all that. He can do those things. But I'm doing the work. I said it. I'm going to do the work, and I'm already doing the work. And that just hit me. And I pulled Corbin in my room after God spoke to me. And I told him that. I was like, you just need to be relieved of that pressure that you feel. I said, you just do. I said, God's going to do it. God's already doing it. I had a friend reach out to me after that. My husband had posted that. And the people that knew us at that time and that know us now, they read this story every year. But this year, so many people have reached out and just said how encouraging that was and how they remember that time, or it really spoke to them to where they are now. And my friend reached out to me, and she was with us during that time. We had all gone to church together, and just really said some great things. She had she lost a child around the same time that we had lost our child in 2004. She lost hers in 2005. And we just had a great conversation. That's God just confirming to me that I'm doing a great work. I'm using this story. Not everybody gets to have their baby restored, but I gave you this child, and I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that. Corbin doesn't have to do anything. He's relieved of that. And so, just a little backstory on our relationship. You were Corbin's first grade teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how crazy is it that we're not even friends on Facebook?
Nope, we weren't.
But you heard the story, and at the end you were like, I know that kid.
Mm-hmm.
And you reached out, and then when you and I were talking, you said that you asked your husband if he remembered Corbin. And I don't even know that you said his name.
Oh, I said, do you remember anybody with the last name Shobe? And he said, Corbin. He was your student like 10 years ago. And I was like,
His name is going to be Corbin Dallas. He needs a great name because he's going to do great things. He remembered his name. And that was God. That was nothing that Corbin did. He was your student. He loved you dearly. You're still like one of his most favorite teachers of all time. But that was God using that story. That was God using him. And that's what's so encouraging to me. And so when you reached out to me, I read my husband and Corbin the text that you had sent me. And Corbin's standing there and he gets this little grin on his face. He doesn't like to show his emotions, like overly excited or anything like that. And he just looked at me and he said, when am I going to get to tell the story? And I said, buddy, it is your story to tell. When it is time for you to step into it, you're going to step into it and you're going to tell it because it's his story. God is already doing something. And I have 3 kids. All 3 are very different, and not to, say that Corbin is any more special than anyone else. I just know that God has used this in my life and has used this in other people's lives as well, and will continue to do so. And so I'm excited that you let me share it. Since you texted, I've been thinking about it and just remembering those things. And I've had to go back and read some of my journals and stuff because that time was just so, you forget things. And so, encouragement that I have for any woman going through a loss or going through a celebration, write those things down. They are good to remember. They are good to remind you of God's goodness, of who he is, of how he brings you through. In 2004, he chose not to restore our baby. But he is still good. The God of the mountain is the God of the valley, and he is still good. My friend who lost her child in 2005, during that funeral, it was worship because God is still good, regardless of what happens. And thinking back on when I was praying for God to show me something of how to trust, I was asking for God to show me how to trust that he was going to make everything okay, that my baby was going to be born and or I didn't know if it was a boy or girl at the time, but that my baby was going to be healthy and everything was going to be okay. Instead of, God, help me to trust you regardless of what the situation is, to trust you. And I think that that's the bigger picture is God is good regardless. It's just finding it sometimes. We have to search through some things. So that's my story.
Well, I cannot thank you enough for coming and sharing. I really feel like all of this was God ordained.
Yeah.
How I heard your story was actually, I was with a friend/client of mine. I was at her house while she was going through a miscarriage. And we were there. I was there when it was confirmed that that's what was happening. And it wasn't anything else. It was the baby had passed and there was no heartbeat. And now we were, waiting. And that's a very emotional and just a very sensitive situation. And I had left the room to let her and her husband just kind of have some time alone together. And she called me back into the room and she said, I want you in here. I have to tell you this story. And so she proceeds to read your husband's Facebook post story out loud to both her husband and myself. And she's reading it and she's reading it. And I'm like, I just kind of have this feeling. I'm like, why does this, it didn't sound familiar in the sense that I'd ever heard the story before. I hadn't. But then when it got to his name, I was like, I know that family. I said, I know that child. I taught that child and remember him vividly. You cannot forget Corbin.
Forget him.
You can't ever. And so she was, uplifted and full of hope in that moment, and which was so encouraging. And I was too. And so, knowing that we were doing this podcast and sharing different stories, and not just for people to learn about the process of pregnancy and childbirth, but also for their faith.
Yeah.
Also for their faith to be lifted up and to be strengthened, and for people to be full of hope. And so I just had to reach out to you. I had to find you on Facebook and be like, would you be willing to do this? So I'm so honored and glad that you were.
I appreciate it. It's, I love looking back at a situation to see how God's hand has been through it. You knew Corbin, what?
It was 11 years ago. Yeah, 10 or 11 years ago.
He'll be a senior in high school, and you were his first grade teacher, and you substituted in kindergarten for him. And that God's hand was on there. God knew ahead of time that this was going to happen.
Yeah.
Just
crazy because back then I wasn't even planning on having kids yet. I was so far from that.
So, God is good. Regardless of the situation, God is good. And, don't decide until it's been decided. Have the faith.
Thanks again for joining us today. Be sure not to miss an episode by hitting subscribe. Also, we'd love for you to leave a review of the show so that more people like you can hear more stories like these. If you're local to the Triad of North Carolina and seeking childbirth classes, birth consultations, or a birth doula, please click on the link in the show notes to take you to our website for more information. Just as a reminder, this show is not giving medical advice, so please continue to see your personal care provider as needs arise. Also, if you would like to be a guest on the Surrendered Birth Stories podcast, please click the link in the episode show notes to get in touch with me. We hope you have a great week, and remember, learn all that you can, make the best plans, and then leave it in God's hands.